Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Whiskey Neat, spirited conversations with interesting people. I'm your host, Kristopher Hart. Today, if you haven't guessed it, I actually am super excited about this. We got to sit down with the man who's bringing back American brandy, Joe Heron. And we actually had a surprise guest. I wasn't expecting him until last night when he texted me, but Morgan Weber is back on another episode. And the conversation just gets so deep that we lose track of time. We run out of time. So Joe Heron started Copper & King's Brandy Company in the heart of Louisville in 2014, Butchertown. I mean, right in the heart of Louisville, Kentucky, Bourbon Country, and decided to start his own American brandy company, which is complete bonkers. But, I mean, despite all red flags, everyone was telling him, "You're why are you not making a whiskey?" He pulled it off. I mean, he is making and bringing back American brandy. I mean, now you've got places like Heaven Hill who just produced their first brandy. So it's an incredible category. It's grown a lot, and it's introduced a lot of bourbon drinkers outside the category of bourbon and into brandy, and they are doing some really interesting things. We kind of dance around where this one comes from, but this is actually finished in Westland, Seattle's, the single malt out of Seattle, out of their barrels, and it is the most bizarre thing out of Copper & King's yet. This week's episode is sponsored by Brown-Forman and Woodford Reserve. Woodford Reserve is a classic bourbon, probably one of the most well-known and just phenomenal distilleries out of Kentucky, and I'm just honored to have them a part of the show. We've got a few new sponsors coming on board, so we'll be talking about that next time I see you guys. In the meantime, please check out everything on Google Play, iTunes. We're on Facebook. Please go to the website. Please rate and review. I know you guys are used to that whole pitch. But without further ado, Joe Heron from Copper & King's and Morgan Weber from 8 Row Flint. Cheers. Last time you were here, you had the corn whiskey and the peach brandy about to hit, or it was several months out, really, and then it's hit. It's come and gone 2 rounds already. Like the next round of peach came out, people bought it up, went crazy. So I assume you're a millionaire now? No, not quite.
No. He's lying.
I wish.
Well, Copper & King's, this city, about a year and a half ago, I was dealing with, is it Jono? Is that how you pronounce it?
Jono Marcus,
yeah,
yes.
Jono, and then he kind of left, but before he left and moved on to whatever greener pastures, I made it to the distillery right after Harvey and visited with Drew Pomeroy.
Yes.
Yeah. Great guy. And,
Still there.
Yeah, I know. I talked to him yesterday. I told him I was going to mention his name. Shout out to Drew.
Yeah.
And it's where we discovered the glory that is Copper & King's. I don't think.
Oh, that's super kind. Thank you.
I'm gonna. It's coming. More kindness is coming. How many people have called you crazy? Because you went in the heart of Bourbon Town and was like, hey, I want to. Because like we talked about before the show, American brandy's not talked about enough, and it's a category that's.
It's interesting. That is literally the first question that anybody ever asks on a tour, or when I'm meeting with someone like Morgan and his group or whatever, is who is stupid enough to start a brandy distillery in Bourbon Country, and
pull it off on the first attempt.
I don't know. Pulling it off. Let's wait. We're throwing a lot of punches, but I think what was anomalous, actually, as we went through it, made a lot more sense from what we were trying to do. We weren't trying to be a cheap and sweet California brandy. We weren't trying to be a traditional European brandy. We were trying to be American brandy. And being anchored in the heart of American distilling was super helpful. From a rational economic point of view, 76% of brandy is drunk Central Time Zone East, so it really makes sense. And then, as we've lived this for, the 4.5 years that we've been doing it, it turns out that the history of American brandy is very rich in Kentucky. It's been a state that had in the late 1800s 400 brandy distilleries. That doesn't include another 100 that made whiskey and brandy. So there was this history of of making brandy in the state. The first commercial winery in the U.S. was in Kentucky, believe it or not. So it clearly today within the bourbon boom seems anomalous and odd, but the reality is in Kentucky, people like good booze. People appreciate that you make good booze, and our affection for bourbon is quite bright, and our reflection of bourbon is quite bright. So it might have seemed the strangest decision. It was definitely the smartest decision that we made, was to be there. I think we have a personality that's well suited to being in Bourbon Country. So
it's something that, and I'll tell you a little backstory, and I don't think Magdalene knew this, who's off camera. When we first proposed the idea, we originally had planned on just visiting Copper and Kings, and we were blown away. And we work with like a network of stores. We've got, agreements with Specs and Total Wine. So the group that I help admin, we bring in barrels all the time. And when I proposed the idea of bringing in a barrel of Copper and Kings, same thing. People were like, no one's drinking that. Why would you do that? And I thought, no, just wait. Like this is not what you think. And when you grow up in a culture of just one spirit, a lot of people don't even think about other spirits. They don't even consider it an option. And when we brought in our barrel of Phoenix, within a day, I think we had sold 30 cases in a day. And
wow.
It went really well, and people, in fact, 30 cases, right? So it was like 240 bottles, so somewhere around there. Within 24 hours, we had almost killed the whole barrel, and people were just blown away by it. They weren't sure what to expect, and now you've kind of piqued people's interest outside of a category that, especially coming from the heart of Louisville. I mean, you've distracted people from bourbon, and you've introduced them to something great.
So when we looked at getting into brandy in our stupidity and ignorance.
While you're saying that, I want to taste something.
So I think we should taste what Morgan selected, which is another Phoenix barrel.
Sure.
A better Phoenix barrel,
apparently.
All my babies are equal in my eyes.
Not mine. I prefer my babies, not my oldest kids.
Yeah. So now I'm distracted from the original conversation, which is
I
me.
apologize.
But let me tell you about the Phoenix barrel. So when we first started with our apple brandy, what we wanted to do was take our typical bourbon barrel, maturation cycle, and then wrap it in the butterscotch of sherry. That was the concept, the rough concept. And we bought 14 500-liter sherry butts, Oloroso sherry butts from Spain, 30-year-old. And I hated it. I literally said it, this tastes like it's been aged in a coffin. I couldn't stand it. So we sold them. We sold them mostly to breweries.
It's very specific.
Yeah. And breweries and a couple of distilleries, whiskey distilleries, because whiskey can take brandy. It either works or it doesn't. There's no half measure. Whiskey's got enough muscles to manage a finish well. But we were left with 4 of these giant barrels that were broken. And there's no cooperage in Kentucky and in America that can go and restave them. So I went to Calvin Cooperage and I said, hey, I want you to chop up all of this old Oloroso sherry wood into kindling, and I want you to fire New American oak barrels using that as kindling. And it was extraordinary. I mean, the flavor profile is, you have all that big, dark fruit richness of brandy, and then you've got this sherry butterscotch, and then is that scotch that I'm hearing in the background? It's kind of this crazy little scotchy
smoky note.
And you're going, wow, where did that come from? And isn't that a lot of joy? And we had a lot of fun, Morgan, when we were tasting this, because we must have tasted 5 or 6, maybe 8 even.
10.
Yeah, a lot of, and you come back to this and it'll never happen again. That's the sadness of it. We only had 14 to start with. We only had 4 barrels for kindling, and those barrels are there. And, we can and we are aging brandy in it again, but that intensity is a one-off. We would never call it a Phoenix barrel again because.
So you're saying the Phoenix is done?
Done.
It was
over.
just a couple barrels.
You have to go
move on to the next thing.
Cultivar and have it there.
Wow,
Yeah.
I didn't realize it was such a fleeting moment.
Yeah, and that's we have so much of those fleeting moments that are kind of, they have this joy in them. There's a lot of creative expression and excitement between the people that enjoy them, and then they're gone. I mean, the pear brandy is the same. I mean, I have 11 barrels. I have even less, and that was started being made in 1996. I'll be dead before that. Something like, even if we made it and we've just started making pear brandy, even if we made it ourselves, it would take 30 years to do, 40 years. So we have this role and this responsibility, and we enjoy it, of being the people that raise the awareness and enjoyment and excitement around American barrier. We're the standard bearer of American brandy. That's what we do. We say, this is cool shit. Drink it. We might not have made it, but it was made in America, and therefore we're going to raise that flag and say, this is what we do.
Well, and you guys are distilling now, though. Right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So when
I wouldn't say, and Morgan and I were chatting because he has his projects on the go, and fruit brandy is difficult. So you have to understand how a brandy conversation will work. The brandy conversation will start on fruit. Okay, what's the fruit you use? Where do you get it? Blah, blah, blah. Then you'll go to fermentation, and then you'll go into distillation and then maturation. Those 4 pillars are equal. They're not one more powerful than the other.
Yeah.
They are equal partners. So I think we've nailed grape brandy. I think we've really nailed apple brandy recently, because the 4th pillar of maturation and the balance of sherry is where we've been working. And so, and again, we were discussing this, and I said, I think we're at and I'm going to be modest because I actually think we're better than this, but I'm going to say we're an 8 on grape brandy, we're a 7 on apple brandy, and we're a 4 on pear brandy.
Really?
Yeah. And
We didn't make
that. We didn't make that.
That was the benchmark.
That's a 10.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Okay, that's a 10. Yeah. But our pear brandy that we're distilling now is a 4. Our peach brandy that we're distilling now is a 3.
We talked about that.
We're in it together. The more of us making brandy, discussing brandy is better.
It's better for everybody. Rising tide's good. I mean, yeah.
So we have,
raises all ships.
Different maturation cycles, but it also, you don't just make brandy. You have to make wine. So how you make the pear wine or the peach wine is integral. And then you'll go, and Dan Farber, my friend from Ossicalis, will tell you, with brandy, you're going to distill the tails down to 0 alcohol, and then retain those tails and reuse them to retain the intensity. So there are philosophies and processes that are quite different, but making good pear wine that retains all that essence of that pear, that's really hard. It's even harder than peach. Peach has a natural and is quite a lot more aromatic.
Pear is so delicate.
It's dead, and it loses it like that, and just dies out. So again, these are the things that are cool. Mastering these things are exciting and interesting, and you had a whole look at the historical aspects of the fruit for your peach brandy, which we're not doing that.
Right.
Well, I just think there's so little to compare things to now. Like in America with fruit brandy, there's just not that many people experimenting like you're experimenting on the creative side, on the just the finishing side. Like it's a category, in my opinion, like we haven't even tapped the ceiling on.
No, I don't think you've. I say you haven't even tapped the bottom, but it's a category that hasn't been talked about until the last couple of years, and it's because now let me take that back. There are places, you work in an industry and have worked in an industry for quite some time, that has fostered a great environment of diversity in spirits. Places like Anvil, what's his name that you had talked about seeing later? The guy that owns Anvil, Bobby. Yeah, you guys have been preaching the good word of mezcals and cognacs and armagnacs and brandies for a very long time. But the average consumer, I mean, the second slowest moving category in spirits is Armagnac. And now I think because of the bourbon boom, some of these like unadulterated cask strength Armagnacs are now, like what we're working on tirelessly with Lincoln Tata right now, are now seeing this new light. That it's just, as a consumer, it's nice to see the average consumer adopt more of the mentality of what you guys have worked in for the past 10 years. Mm-hmm. So it's you have done a phenomenal thing, and right behind it, the peach brandy, people ate it up like candy. It tasted just like, some people even question whether or not it was unadulterated,
right?
Because it just tasted so. Have you tasted it yet?
I have.
It's very intense, candy Georgia peaches. It's like this, like if you were to reduce a peach down and just take the syrupy and drink that straight, is what it kind of tastes like. So it's a good thing, and I really am honored to sit here with both of you, because to see the diversity in spirits open up the way that they have is good for everybody.
I think one of the great things about being in brandy is you have this flex that is much, much more expansive than other spirits. You have a very malleable spirit. It's quite promiscuous in the way that it will take on barrel flavor and yeast and all
even
of
how it's fermented and distilled.
All of that stuff. So because it's all about retention and concentration. So every tool that you use is going to be in that spirit, and it's very malleable. And then the second thing about American brandy is, so we're not limited to a provincial dogma. We are continentally diverse. We have
like craft beer.
But think of the grapes out of Texas to Michigan. Think of California to New York. Think of what Copper and Kings do to across the river in Indiana and Ohio. We have this expansive geography and diversity that is embraced. Like we're all saying, this is our brandy. Then you have all of the fruit diversity from different grapes, which is hugely important, to different fruits, peach, apple. And the way we talk about brandy in America incorporates all of those different diverse fruits. And that is really, really important. And then you have the opportunity to do very novel, pioneering barrel finishes. And that using that palette is so expansive to paint with. You're talking about gigantic Jackson Pollocks of distillate. Yeah. You can go in and you're all big and bold and confident, and we're extremely fortunate in America to sit on the cusp of this wave of brandy that's being driven by people wanting to drink cool shit and to taste
and to try
and make
cool, yeah.
and to work in a way that reflects the personality of the country. And this is a country of expansive imagination.
There's a lot of stubborn bourbon drinkers, but bourbon's very confined with, or traditionally confined with, what you can do with wood. Meaning that Scotch, you can use almost any kind of barrel out there. And so the range of flavors from peat to sherry to just straight virgin oak to ex-bourbon is so much more broader. The palate's broader than what you get with bourbon. And you guys are doing a very whiskey-esque brandy that has that freedom to I've been to your, would you even call it a basement? What would you call it?
We call it the cellar.
I've been to your cellar, and there you talk about having the freedom to try new things. There was no less at the time than 20 different, ex-beer barrels, ex-tequila barrels, we're going to talk a little bit about this Way Up West coming out, which is, it doesn't say on the label, but from what I've gathered, the Pacific Northwest whiskey, I'm thinking maybe...
There's not a lot of single malt whiskey. West.
Yeah, so
let's narrow it down to the one.
to the one out of Seattle. Yeah. And to have that freedom to kind of play with those things, I think is what sets American beer apart from German beer. Those stubborn German purity laws keep basically the beer tasting exactly the same with very little variance. Well, it's the
same for cognac.
Yes, agreed.
I mean, you have exactly the same dogmatic guardrail that exists to define everybody as being the same.
Sure.
Whereas with craft beer and even I think single malt whiskey is going to be gigantic in America because we will be doing things like Balcones do with all of those, those grains and different finishes and whatever. But for us, that intensity is inbuilt. I mean, the secret is I didn't like brandy.
I was going to ask, how did you get interested in brandy?
It was really just this next space that you could see was an enormous category that was really bifurcated on cheap and sweet and traditional and expensive.
Cheap and sweet is a good way of putting a lot of those.
And so it was sitting there without any one American personality that said, we make American brandy, the price point that sat between those two things. But also, this is brandy, and I'm talking about good brandy. And our mutual friend Nicholas Palazzi has seriously introduced me to some exceptional
great
cognac
things,
and Armagnac. And so it always has a good start, and that's in the distillate, and it has a great finish. That's in the distillate. But that even keeled nature of
the palate
of the spirit as you drink it, and as it's been that's in the bottle and the most commonly sold is pretty uninspired relative to what do we like about whiskey. We like that feisty rambunctiousness that sits in the mid palate. If you like a good room agricole, it'll have a nice little bounce and a little in the mid palate.
Sure.
The mid palate is the mid palate's the key to all of these things. Start and finish are actually the easiest part of all alcohol production, from wine to beer to spirits. So when you look at what we try to do, we want the whole band. We want drums, guitar, bass. We want two guitars. We want that mid palate to be rocking. And to do that, it takes a specific process. Firstly, we're in copper pot stills, which are tools of intensity and distillation. Their job is to intensify and concentrate what's inherent in the base, in the fruit, in the wine. The second part of it is once we distill to 135, which is our pretty much our batch proof sealing, it goes straight into the barrel without dilution. Okay, that's a really important thing. So if you're making whiskey, you're diluting to 125 or low 100s. That's a process. So we go in and we're then, unlike what you would see in let's use cognac, we don't add dosage, sugar into the barrel, and we don't add water during the maturation cycle to compensate for evaporation. So we make straight brandy, like straight whiskey, we make straight brandy. And that results in an intense profile. We also have an advantage of using American oak. American oak is higher in lactones, meaning more lignans, and vanillins, meaning more honey, caramel, warm, those things, the way we describe good beer. We have all of those advantages working for us in everything that we do. And you're kind of talking about that a lot in terms of making good juice.
That's one of the things we were talking about last night, just with the peach brandy.
Yeah.
That's ours. That if there was one thing that you could improve on this, and we both met each other like almost simultaneously, like mid palate, it's a little thin on the mid palate, and I can say that I didn't make it, we didn't make it.
Sure.
But it's like, how do you continue experimenting to just continue improving? And I think one of the things that we've definitely seen flesh itself out with the craft beer movement is that with no rules came no rules.
Sure.
And so it just became how many hops and how many different ways can we stuff that into this?
Recently, glitter, right?
No way.
Glitter beer. Yeah, it's a real thing.
Okay,
right.
There's a Fonzie moment for you.
So there's this this situation that we've seen the roller coaster go through with craft beer, where it was all just bigger, faster, louder, higher, right? There's no rules, so then there's also no pumping of the brakes and no genuine feeling of self
Awareness. Yeah.
you know.
Sure.
And so I think one of the things that the first time I went to Copper and Kings blew my mind the most, and then having a further conversation with Joe last night at Cultivare, is that with Joe there is a healthy and strong self-awareness to say that we know that the pear brandy kicks ass.
Yeah.
And we want to make it ourselves, and we think that we're at about a 4 on that level. So it's
to have that self-awareness.
And just say that, I'm not just so used to the smell of my own that I just think that everything we do is going to be amazing.
Yeah.
And I think that is a key element to someone who experiments so deeply as Copper and King's experiment, to say, we're willing to go the distance on this thing. And then if it doesn't turn out, that's also okay, because we probably learned stuff throughout the process.
Well, sure. Yeah. I mean, the idea of trying new things is great. Following through is even better, but knowing when something doesn't work is probably the most important of those three.
And also listening. I was fortunate to be on a panel with Dave Smith from St. George the other day, and they do an exceptional pear eau de vie. And in my opinion, the best pear eau de vie in America is made by St. George. And I don't like eau de vie, by the way. It's not my stuff that I drink, and I like brown spirits. But I appreciate what Dave has done, and his objective was that the distillate, and you're going to love this, Morgan, his comment was the distillate is the carrier, the vehicle for the aromatic. That's his whole objective, and I've never heard anybody describe it like that.
So he was focused on the nose.
He's all focused on the aromatic and the taste. And then he spoke about what you had to do with pear brandy and how much of the aromatics are driven out of the skins. All right. So when you make apple brandy, you get the juice, you make the wine, and the skin plays no role. In fact, you avoid the skin because it's quite tannic. That's just the nature. The leaves of what left over is valuable, but the skin is not. But in pears, you actually require all of that skin. And I didn't know that, but I'm listening because my brandy's a 4. I need a 10.
Sure.
So you got to listen, you got to read, you got to have someone like Brandon, Morgan and I talking about the peach brandy. And so we both agree the mid palate is the weakness, the front end aromatic and even first front of your tongue is excellent, but that's not how you drink. That's how you taste. Tasting and drinking are 2 different things. So what do you do about that? And we'll be working because we're trying to make this peach brandy too. And it's what you do. I was telling a story. So we decided that we were going to get like peach slush. We're going to ferment it, and then because it's going to have all that peach in, nothing missing. And it all fell onto the bottom of the still on the plate and cooked.
Yeah.
It smelled awful. Just terrible. But we learned something, so you don't do that. You don't. I
think that's how brimstone was created.
This was definitely brimstone. So, you're learning that the barrel discussion is with us. So what we learned was, we use American oak, and we use new American oak because we want some warmth in the pear and the peach. But with fruit brandy, you're pulling backwards versus grape brandy, you're moving forwards. So we don't do any char on our pear brandy. It's just heavy toast, big wine gallon size, 60 gallons, not 53 gallons.
Like the Phoenix, yeah.
Because we don't want to overpower that. No, with the peach can get a little foxy, a little skunky. So we're doing a number 1 char just to pull that note out, to oxidize that note a little. And then you wait 4 years. You wait a minimum of 4 years before
you find out if it's good or bad.
That's the minimum that you're going to need to age a good brown spirit, in our opinion.
I'm with you too, and to backtrack on that eau de vie, I always have a hard time feeling confident about the pronunciation of that word. But have you tried Cobra Fire?
I haven't yet.
So Nicholas Platzi is a phenomenal guy. And I love what Peam Spirits does as an importer and everything that they do. They like to bring in the fun stuff, right? And some people who know what I'm about to say may or may not agree with this, but they're like the NASA liquor of importers. Like there's a tremendous selection, lots of really fun things there, and for a smaller guy to be able to take that initiative, you can tell that there's a passion behind it.
No doubt.
And it's a raisin eau de vie at cask strength or still strength or whatever.
So it's not made from raisins.
I didn't know that.
Okay, so that's just
Have
the
you
French
had it?
red of grape. Yes, I
Okay.
do. I have it. I'm very good friends with Nicholas, who is, by the way, the best palate in America.
Oh, really?
I'm a midget in his palate, acumen.
It's a political correct term.
Yeah. In Darwin's terms, I've not got out of the ocean relative to
His palate.
His excellent. So it's basically, an unaged brandy like we make with our immature brandy.
Sure.
And it's cool.
It's really interesting.
I think it's way better than vodka. So.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Anything that's got the actual raw distillate of 1792 is actually phenomenal. Like unaged White Dog. If it's got a little character to it, I'm all for it. Yeah. But I do prefer a barrel-aged brandy as opposed to the raw thing. It was interesting and fun, and I've tasted people on it, but it's not something that I'm going to spend all night with kind of enjoying the way I would a mezcal.
I think it's more, the number one user of our immature brandy, that's the legal TTB term, is immature, not unaged if it's grape brandy.
Yeah, why?
I have no idea.
Yeah, well, let's talk about that. I went looking. Let's go down the rabbit hole of the recent change in classification and the struggles with it. All of a sudden, a crackdown from the TTB when it comes to formulas and like they're where it used to be a lot easier to get these things done. Now it seems that they're giving you a little bit of a headache. So I went looking for y'all's labels to see what was coming down the pipeline. And there's one called Way Up West, which we had previously mentioned a few minutes ago.
We should drink some of that.
Yeah, let's definitely try it. So Way Up West is y'all's American brandy, finished in Pacific Northwest single malt whiskey barrels. As you guys know, I can think of one distillery up north, and it includes the word West. That has, that's definitely where these barrels came from. But you said that you had a little bit of trouble.
So the definition, the TTB...
Let me see that pour glass real quick, if you don't mind, so we can...
The TTB definition of brandy is quite simple in terms of maturation. It is very specific. Brandy has to be aged for 2 years in oak. That's it. There's nothing more to it. And up until recently, the fact that all of our barrel finishes were in oak were perfectly adequate to describe within the context of we make brandy.
Sure.
Brandy aged in tequila barrels, brandy aged in single malt barrels, whatever. That was adequate. And in the last 2 months or so, the TTB philosophy has changed to the fact that aging in a barrel, in a defined barrel, requires a formula. And that formula means when you put in a formula, that means it goes on the front of your label, all in the same scale as each other. So we have American brandy aged in Pacific single malt whiskey barrels. That's quite a lot to say.
On a label? Yeah. Hope they don't charge you per letter
on a label. It can feel a little clumsy. That's probably one of the more clumsy ones. We just did one that released today, American brandy finished in few rye whiskey barrels. Now that our formula is American brandy aged in few rye whiskey barrels. But on the back label, in the romance copy, I cannot refer to brandy at all.
Why?
It's American spirit. I really am confused.
Because now it's classified as a distilled spirit
now
specialty.
I'm a distilled spirit specialty. I'm not a brandy.
So just to recap here, you originally all you have to do to meet the requirements to age in oak.
Originally,
and now they've randomly. There's no passing or anything. They just all of a sudden started giving you a hard time on label approval
on these barrel finishes, which involve a specific kind of barrel. And so for them, that changes
the category.
And I believe that what their thinking is that the barrel is a vehicle to do something to the brandy specific to what that barrel is.
Sure.
Because otherwise, why would we call it out? And there is a certain logic to it, and we've navigated that element of it.
So they said you can't even use the word brandy.
Only on the front, because that's my approved formula.
Okay.
But I can't say it's called American Spirit on the back.
But when it becomes a distilled spirit specialty,
You're
you
a
can
spirit.
start adding
Romance
other
copied
things to it.
You can start talking very specifically about what the barrel does and the flavor profile and how the barrel has impacted the flavor profile.
But correct me if I'm wrong too. If it's a distilled spirit specialty, you can't call out a specific age statement on it anymore.
Nope, you cannot.
So how's the TTB handling Scotch and
Poorly.
rum?
Poorly.
Like Scotch and rum have been age stating finishes for decades and decades and decades.
Well, so
Is
and
that all
bourbon's
gonna
doing it
change?
now too, right? So bourbon's a lot of bourbon producers are being very specific in the amount of time that they're finishing, but their age statement, like they allow, if I and Wade doesn't listen to, he's not going to hear this, but if I'm not mistaken, I believe that if you list an age statement on a finished bourbon, it has to be the age in the finished barrel, right? So like if you do 2 years in a cognac barrel, you can't list, the other years don't count, the original maturation.
If it was a 12-year-old bourbon finished for 2 years in a cognac barrel.
Yeah, so it's either, and I'm trying to remember, but it's either you can't use age statements anymore, or it has to be the finish only.
So ridiculous.
It's extremely absurd because all you're doing is being transparent to what's in the bottle. It just seems absurd. It seems defeating the purpose. The whole purpose of transparency and accountability is now being clouded by bureaucracy.
No, I don't think that we have, again, I'll use that word, the dogma of Scotch whiskey, where someone, like Compass Box and John Glazer are really punished for saying actually what's in their liquid. I don't think we have that issue.
We haven't gotten to that point yet.
Yeah. No, and I think the TTB see their role as providing a public service that informs accurately as to what is in your bottle and what you can expect to get from that. So it's a challenge. Sometimes you meander around a pretty understaffed agency, trying to get an approval on something that Joe Heron has dreamed up in his head and is trying to bring to life. I mean, I get it. I get all of that.
Very eloquently. Meander around an understaffed agency.
It's just it is what it is. We're getting closer to being better, and the rules are becoming, clearer to us because they changed. They changed, and we have to work within those parameters. And I'm not unhappy. It's a little clumsy from a marketing point of view, from a consumer perception point of view of why people drink and how they choose products. It's a little clumsy as to how that's done. But that's not insurmountable at all. We are surmounting it. And we still do have opportunities that are much, much bigger than cognac.
Well, I tell you right now, this is extremely interesting.
Yeah, it's so delicious.
It's
It's hard to call that a brandy. It's got all the qualities you like in a brandy, but
He said we're going to get a single barrel of this. I'm just kidding. He didn't say that.
Killing me.
I would.
To be Morgan Weber. Well, it's extremely fat. It's got kind of a really sweet initially, and then it's got some kind of like pepper on the back end. It's just I would never expect this amount of difference, and from, I'm just gonna say Westland, from what I think is Westland, because their single malt is, when you think of single malt whiskey, you think of a very, this is like this. This is like, there's a lot happening here that I wouldn't expect from just bringing together brandy and single malt whiskey.
I think that it's just an underappreciated kind of skill, which is how do you use a barrel and then refine it. So these are whiskey barrels, so they toast and charred. We'll try some King Estate red wine, and then we have a port. And so all of that direction is very, very exciting. And we're living in probably the most adventurous to date. I mean, it's going to get more adventurous of palate and taste profile and food and beverage consumption.
I agree with you. This reminds me of when HBO and The Sopranos came out. It was like the golden age of television, like the beginning of where we are now with things like Game of Thrones and
Netflix and all of that. That's a great analogy.
And spirits, it is the most exciting time currently, but it feels like it's only going to get better. So we're like this golden age of and I know I beat to death the Houston Bourbon Society so much on the show, but it is an exciting time to be in Houston when it comes to spirits. Well, it's unlike anything
20 years
before.
ago, no one would have cared.
5 years ago.
I'd say 5 years.
5 years ago.
I mean, this city, it started 10 years ago, and in the last 5 years.
I'm just talking about the American drinking public.
Sure.
Like, nobody cared. You couldn't give away good bourbon. And now, like, people like Joe, people like me, were able to do these experiments and see them through purely because the drinkers are open-minded now. Like, we haven't always had that.
Everyone is at a point where they're searching for that next new thing to get in early on something, because like many of us, we got into the bourbon game late, right? I got in when Pappy and George T. Stagg and the Buffalo Trace and Tea Collection was on allocation. You have guys that remember when it was just sitting on the shelf. Mm-hmm. So you develop such a passion and excitement for spirits that you want to be the next. I've been preaching Copper and Kings for 2 years and talking about it. And I remember when you came on, I think you had said something that initially made me think that you thought you had the first Phoenix barrel. And I was like, no, we did one too. Like,
yeah, I didn't know that.
There's this.
I didn't remember that.
I mean, it's totally fair enough. It's such an exciting
think
time.
of that, Hunt. I mean, this city got 2 of 14 barrels. Mm-hmm. The rest of them are just all spread out all over the country.
So I'm not saying ours is better than yours, but you probably got a reject because we got.
It's probably true.
We probably passed on yours.
There were no rejects.
Yeah, no, there absolutely wasn't.
Rejects.
As soon as I tasted it,
I need to have a corner of just like keeping barrels that I just won't sell them for say 10, 15 years.
Real funky, yeah.
Like,
no, we just leave them.
And just,
so we've got a pear barrel. We just sit them there and let them hang out and age and forget about them and not have the economic peril that we face, that we have to sell all of the cool shit all of the time.
Yeah.
Speaking of the cool shit.
Okay. Yeah.
Can we talk about, I think since I was there, y'all distilled, I'm just going to call it the Spit Barrel. Did yes. Y'all distill it?
So we
Are you aware of this?
No, project? I'm not.
Yeah, okay.
Well, so
let's see. I want to hear Morgan describe it.
Well, I'm just going to describe it from my perspective. We're all I think we tasted. We did this barrel with the Silver Dollar, and it was part of the Hurricane Harvey relief situation. So we walk in, and I'm just used to, when I'm in a barrel tasting, drinking through 8, 10, 12 barrels, whatever, and not actually drinking all of it, and then just on the ground or in the rickhouse or wherever. Sure. And Joe went out of his way. He's like, if you spit or if you don't finish something, please don't throw it away. I have a bucket for that. And it was like, whatever, sure. And I'm just in the moment.
Oh, my God.
I'm just in the moment, and I'm not remembering it. And Susie, who is super intense and awesome, is like, don't throw it away. Stop it. Stop it. So I kind of trained myself in the middle of this. And I had no idea where we were going after. And then he had this 55-gallon barrel in the corner that he just opened it up and dumped everybody's into.
Leftovers.
Yeah.
Not their spit. There's no human DNA in there.
There's some.
There's
sure.
some.
Okay.
There's some.
I'm so excited to see where this goes.
And I was like, Joe, what do you do with this? And he's like, when it gets full, we're going to distill it and just see what happens. So I think since I've been there, that happened.
So you're talking about fully matured
everything,
spirits,
everything
dumped in
beer, wine, soda, tasting whatever's left over that's liquid from an event, from the bar, from tasting.
Sure.
We put into a barrel, which is called Let the Mystery Be, which was the theme song from The Leftovers.
It should be called Liability Lane.
No. This is great stuff. It's very spearminty right now.
Oh my gosh.
I don't know why.
There's a lot of gum in it.
So, okay.
And so we age it. And we're a barrel and a half of aging distillate now. And it's actually, in all honesty, it's not bad.
Okay,
it's really not bad.
I'm sorry. Just to understand what's happening here. Leftovers, and you're sampling from the leftovers.
No, we're collecting everything that's left over.
Sure.
Just holding it.
Just holding it
until there's
putting it
enough
in a 55-gallon drum.
Okay, Queens, when you said it's not bad, it makes me think you're in there like, almost perfect.
I'm not doing that. I'll distill it first.
Okay. So you're going to distill it.
We have.
Oh, you have?
Yeah, we actually have of distillate. We have 65 gallons of Let the Mystery Be.
Distillation is purification.
Exactly.
So what?
It all revolves around what environmental responsibility is something inherent in the in the company,
in the culture.
In the culture. And we got quite enamored with the trash tiki movement in bars.
And what exactly?
And trash tiki is a movement that 2 Australian bartenders started it, but in essence is, how do you minimize waste in a bar concept? How do you stop throwing away?
There's a ton of waste, yeah.
All of this stuff, and how do you use it either in in a secondary cocktail, which is quite common, or all of that egg yolk, use it in French toast in the kitchen, or how do you not throw shit away?
Sure.
And so our trash tiki moment beyond getting rid of plastic straws is, we distill all the leftovers in a barrel called Let the Mystery Be.
So are you going?
And we use a brandy distillation process of retention and concentration.
So you distill the leftovers and you put it into I'm assuming a used barrel.
A used brandy barrel.
And now it's
all about reusing.
Sure. So it's, are you going to release 300 bottles or something at some point? Where
we probably will. The idea would be to go to, say, Morgan, and we say, hey, here, there's an environmental charity that you would like to support in Houston, whatever that might be.
Sell the bottles at charity.
Here's your bottles. Here's your cocktails. We took these cocktails. We took trash tiki and manifested it within that cocktail, because bartenders are actually a very activist group. There are people that have strong personalities, are vocal in stating what they believe in, and this is a way that we can talk about environmental sustainability in a compelling way that's memorable.
Do you have a board, people you have to?
Yeah.
Okay.
Her name is Leslie.
Your wife. Yeah. Well, I was just wondering, going back to the original question, how many times have people asked you if you were crazy? And you pitching an idea of like, hey, we want everyone to just put their refuse in this barrel and we're going to turn it into whiskey. And I mean, it's a great idea, fully explained. It sounds like a really fascinating idea, but it's going to sell itself. Like, it's such a tremendous backstory that there's no way it's not going to be a huge hit.
If it was, in all honesty, if it tastes like crap, nobody's going to drink it. People might buy it to give the money to charity.
Sure.
You could do that, but then it's less worthwhile because they don't buy it the second time. But imagine if it turns out to be
really good,
amazing. I mean, wouldn't that be cool? I mean, and you're starting off with quite good base because you got a lot of high proof distillate that's going into the barrel.
Sure.
So and that's an antibacterial. So there's no secondary fermentations that go on. You got too much alcohol in there. I think it's going to turn out good, but I don't know.
I mean, how many mushrooms do you have to eat before you're like?
That's what it sounds like his entire idea was. Like, I can see you, back in 2012 being like, I don't know what the legality of marijuana is in Kentucky, but I can just see you just smoking and being like, oh, I have an idea. I'm going to start a distillery. Are you going to start a bourbon distillery? Nah.
Who would do that?
Stupid.
But we're gonna do it in Kentucky.
Yeah. Everyone's doing bourbon. We're going to do it with grapes. Well, I mean, it's worked out. This is. Let me get back to the way up west. Is this going to be widely released? Are we going to see some in Texas?
I think yes. It's widely released as what 250 gallons is of distillate. It's not widely released by a Brown-Forman standard, but it's not going to be like the pear brandy sold as single barrels. We're probably going to release it to people that are really interested in it.
Sure.
From say K&L down in California, and into
Benny's or whatever.
Benny's or NASA or Bevmo or people that are to sell spirits now in this world. You're having to provide an adventure to your shopper, your guest.
Sure.
So the number one driver of profitability of a customer is not what they buy. That's obvious. It's how long they stay in a store. The longer you can keep a guest in your store, the more money you're going to make. That's the single parameter that if you measure everything. So if you're providing, let's use Total Wine as an example, the variety and scale of a Total Wine or the interesting stuff that
keeps you in
that
looking
NASA
around.
That NASA have, that Alex and tu have. Who's gonna exit out of that stuff saying I'm buying my Jack Daniels and I'm going home
and ignore the entire selection in the store?
So let's say you're going in to let's use Total Wine, which is of such scale. You're going to buy your spirits, you're going to buy your beer, you're going to buy your wine, and you might buy a little decanter because you had this little wine. Oh, I like Manhattans. I've never made cocktails. I think about that whole concept is where the American shopper has moved. I want an adventure. Everything you buy says something about you. What you drink is the biggest story of all. Think about it. I'm a beer drinker or I'm a wine drinker, or I drink Bud Light or I drink St. Arnold, or I drink Jester King or I drink St. Arnold, or I go out and I drink,
everything.
Balcones whiskey, or I drink Glenmorangie, or I drink Jack Daniel. There's all these conversations in your glass every single moment. So when we're sitting down, I'm extremely interested in wine, and I'm extremely interested in Texas wine. That's a really, really big conversation on an immediate level, but on a peripheral level of people who are at the table. These are the fun things. This is the creative expression and palette that you can, make big pictures, big movies.
I'm with you 100%. This is tremendous, and I'm definitely want to. What's the Red Bird?
Well, let's do just. Okay. Do you want to? How much time do we have?
Well, so we've got one more segment left, which is
and
about
how many
15
tastings
minutes.
do you want to do?
But we can stretch a little bit.
Okay, let's do two tastings.
Let me see what time it is. Let's see. No, we've got 15 minutes.
We're gonna do something that's pretty fun.
Okay.
So this is talking about barrel finishes that are not ex-whiskey barrels.
Okay.
These are wine barrels. We have King Estate Grenache Syrah Mourvedre barrel, and we have Redbird, which is a port pipe.
Okay. 6
of them. And the King Estate was aged for 2 years in bourbon and 2.5 years in Grenache Syrah Mourvedre barrels, and it's 100% Muscat distilled at Copper and Kings.
Okay. That sounds amazing.
And remember, these are all at cask strength. Eh? And what would be important for everybody to understand
really
about...
You already had this?
He did.
I hate you so much.
You could have come to dinner.
So cask strength is... Nobody drinks cask strength juice. Okay? They taste it, you sip it, but it's how you tailor it is what's the real pleasure of drinking cask strength brandy, whiskey, whatever.
The nose on these things have just been outstanding.
This is a delight.
Tastes like grandpa's, or smells like grandpa's Werther's on the nose to me.
It does remind me of like a not current cologne, but that 80s cologne, like a little Stetson,
Oh,
like a
some
little
Drucker Noir.
Yeah, some. It reminds me of.
You guys and your prom dates.
It reminds me of my grandfather's a preacher.
This smells like cool.
It reminds me of. It's got an old. It's so aromatic. It's got kind of a.
So Muscat is the most aromatic grape.
Yeah.
It's really out there, and
This is only 4 years old. 2 and 2.
that.
about
It's
4.5.
shocking. How
4.5 years old. Mm-hmm. That's a lot happening for 4 years.
Yeah, and remember, 2.5 of those years have been in an uncharred, just toasted French oak barrel, red wine barrel. So I might sound prejudiced, but I'm not dogmatic.
So this feels like it's going to be even more limited than.
No, this will be the same. Typically, these small batch paintings for us are 45. Think of them as 45s. That records. They're small, so they're typically 4 barrels. These are wine barrels, so this is about 240 spread gallons. That'll be enough.
This is at what proof? 120.
128 about that.
I like it.
It's so good.
We have found a sweet spot now, and that's going to be about 108. We like 108 for more limited releases. This might go a little bit more to keep the wine in.
Yours is naturally 123, right? Your barrel pick.
They're normally around 123 to 126, around that.
Yeah, both of ours are 123. I think when we had tasted it cask strength, it was at 125, and
You'll always lose a little bit as you go into the barrel. You're going to get some evaporation. Ooh, that's good.
It's so good.
It's really, really good.
That's
It's such
really
a floral grape.
Floral is a good word.
Mm.
Yeah, I'm excited about that. I wish I could keep all of these leftovers.
Oh, I know. Hey, listen.
feeling wasteful
you want
now.
to take that with you?
Did you ever read Steinbeck's Cannery Row?
No.
Oh,
I've read several Steinbeck books, but
this is the
traditional
fun one.
Yeah.
These are the fun ones set in Monterey, and the hobos all have a bartender friend who works the bar, and he keeps everything in a bucket below.
For the hobos.
And that's their booze.
The hobo swell.
Yeah.
So
Another
the hobo
politically
swell.
correct term.
That's your leftovers.
I'll take it.
What's great about this, you talk about telling a story, is the empty glass tells the best story, man.
Well, brandy also drinks under proof. Huh? I mean, just by nature. So this is
Meaning it doesn't taste as strong as it is.
no, it doesn't.
Do Morgan first.
Lisa.
So this is a true story. It's not made up. We wanted to do an immature brandy that had a very interesting red cast to it in terms of color. And we got these port barrels and we aged it, and it was awful. And we had 6 port barrels, 100% Muscat, distilled by us, that we lost faith in. And then every year we would talk about making it into something else. An Amaro, a vermouth, whatever. We'd have all these ideas of how we were going to use these 6 barrels, and we never ever got anywhere. And we forgot about them. And 4.5 years later, it's magnificent.
It's great.
Yeah,
And-
and it's a testament to stupidity being a hell of a business talent.
So if something just doesn't taste good, just leave it. Don't give up on it. Have you ever given up on something? Have you ever, you've tasted it in the barrel and decided to dump
I
it?
gave up on that original sherry finish on our apple brandy.
And just dumped it.
We dumped
So
those
what
into smaller
specifically-
sherry barrels.
What didn't you like about it?
It
The
had
oxidized?
a very fusty, musty rancio. Not that nice rancio that you'll get in a good sherry finish. It really just tasted like a coffin, like an old coffin. I mean, it was like dead wood.
Like dust.
Eaten a lot of
It was dusty. It wasn't adding any butterscotch even.
Have you had?
They were great for making sour beers. They were really, really good for that.
I know that you are familiar with Michael Canfield. Have you tried any of the medicinal bourbons from 1920, 1928? Those old medicinal bottles. They taste like they're bourbon, but they taste like a dead tree, like not oak that's been seasoned.
I think a lot of antique whiskey has notes of that, and I don't know.
It's not good. It's interesting, and it's got a historical aspect, and you taste it, and you think this is an interesting experience, but by no means does it actually taste good. But it had this very.
Are these for sale now? Or are these just old?
They're old.
Just
they're
old
old
dusties.
dusties. You know, you find them on secondary. I know you're pretty active on Facebook. They run like $600, but they're a bottle from Prohibition or pre-Prohibition, or they were aging during Prohibition, and then right after, so way well past their prime, and then right after Prohibition was lifted, they bottled them, and so you could taste these like really old pieces of history, but they really do taste like, you know, that old tree stump in your backyard that you've never got around to uprooting, and it just is the woods dissolved.
I've had some good ones from that era though too.
Oh sure, rye whiskey was the era for rye whiskey. Is some of those pre-Prohibition ryes were on Old Overholt was amazing back then.
Canfield gave me a little bit of that.
Yeah, Canfield's a pretty great guy. So,
I think it's conceptually interesting, but it's really much more akin to collecting stamps than it is to discovering good, interesting booze. I mean, it's like finding a penny black or something. I mean, you really. My friend David Mandel has a collection of really exceptional, vintage spirits, in his bar down in Bardstown, and honestly, they're terrific. They really taste good. I mean, they're like, wow, the one comment I've heard most often about vintage whiskey, even from Mike Veach, he will go and he'll say, it's very brandy-esque.
You hear
I can see that.
Yeah, because it gets that richness and that raisiny little dark fruit note starts to come within it. And so I always have a little
giggle to yourself.
A smirk on my face. Yeah, told you so.
So you guys have distilled almost everything except whiskey. Is there ever an intention to do I know, like I have never been a gin person, and I tried the I guess you would say barrel-aged gin or the cask strength gin or the whatever it was that NASA did, and it completely changed my mind about that category. Is that just a super bizarre floral and vegetal spirit that reminds me of what I love about peated whiskey, is that earthy vegetal notes or floral notes that you get sometimes. Is there? I'm sure you get that question a lot.
There are two questions. I'll get to the gin in a second. Firstly, no, we won't make a whiskey. We have 2 barrels of bourbon that we distilled using a brandy technique, but we don't have any fermentation.
I call dibs before he gets on.
Yeah. We didn't have any fermentation, so we did it at Moonshine University. We did the fermentation there and all of that, but it was just way too complex and expensive for us to make it within the parameters of our.
Sure.
But what we do, and we do it very, very well, is we distill finished craft beers. So we'll take a finished craft beer. We do Bo and Luke is the one that we've released, and what it is it's more of a way that we illustrate a brandy distillation philosophy, which is about retention and concentration. If you use a whiskey process with plates, you simply strip most of what you're getting that you want in that beer out. Whereas with brandy process, you concentrate it. So when you are distilling, stouts and porters are the best. Hoppy doesn't work because you concentrate the bitter notes so strongly that it's extremely bitter. So what we've done, we have a little line called Brewski, whiskey from Brews. And we use a brandy process, and it's fun and it's cool. And
I think it's a really interesting next step for whiskey makers in America, because we've had the craft brewers who have been nerding out on the actual grain and how it's processed and toasted and fermented and yeast strains.
It's really important,
We, with Houston Bourbon Consortium, Kevin, I didn't pick this, but Kevin went out to Real Ale, their distillery.
Sure.
And we picked up a 2-year-old barrel from them that I was blown away by. And it was their Belgian wash distilled.
Interesting.
And it is mind-blowing. And I don't even want to say it's mind-blowing for a 2-year-old aged product.
It's just mind-blowing
It
in
is
general.
so easy and delicious. And it was the first time for me, I was like, okay, there's a lot to learn from what these guys have figured out on just making super high quality beer. And so to see what y'all are working with on the brewski side,
it's fun. It's a lot of fun. The distillery smells amazing.
I'll bet.
It just even more than apple, and apple smells like the whole distillery just fills in when you, especially your first distillation. But yeah, so brewski, I would like to do more. We just need more partners to do it. To do it in, but we have the advantage of using Sarah, which is a small still, Magdalena. So we would do more of that if we could. Yeah, we would do more of that if we could. So here's the thing about our gin. We were never going to do gin. There's just, in our business philosophy, that space was very crowded.
Sure.
And
like a vodka, which is even more so.
Less than vodka, but becoming, at parity almost now. But what happened is this. Okay, so when I say we weren't going to do gin, we always did gin because distillers insist on making gin.
Sure.
If you don't allow a distiller to make gin, they're going to resent you because you're neutering their creativity. You can't do that.
Saying a lot coming from Copper and Cage.
So we always made gin, and we would release them in these esoteric barrel finishes from Serbian juniper wood to, bourbon to cognac, and they themed on cats. And then they changed the law in Kentucky for us to sell by the drink, and we decided to make a dry gin so we could have gin and tonics in the courtyard for ourselves. 120 bottles on Sarah. That's how we did it.
The name of the still, Sarah.
The still. So
for those who don't know.
Yeah, Sarah. Our stills are named after women from Bob Dylan songs. We have Isis, Magdalena, and Sarah.
Any pushback on the name Isis at all? No?
She is the goddess of fertility. we refer to it as the Levant. We don't refer to it as Syria. So
you guys started to produce a gin simply to have one.
Yeah, but then what happened was a guy called Dave Driscoll, who wrote a very influential blog, came and literally bought it all and then wrote about it. And then it moved into really broader distribution with Total Wine and Bevmo and, and Benny's and all of these places took it. But what we had done is we had stumbled into the first new distillation style since Hendrick's. And because we make it identically to how we make brandy, we use apple brandy.
Which I think was such a brilliant base.
Because it's crisp, but it also has all that fruit. But we only do a double distillation. So we do the first stripping run, and then we put all the botanicals in the basket and in the pot for the second distillation. And that's it. And then we don't chill filter. The dilution
raw product.
And so you have this really rounded, soft, good structure, juniper structure, dry gin or Old Home. But the second part we stumbled on was almost all gin in the world is a grain neutral spirits base. It's either flavored,
sure,
or it's redistilled. So you'll get 195 proof spirit, and you'll distill it with the botanicals. You're still at 195 proof because it's essentially, you're at that level, it's neutrality already, and you get the flavor in. But this is what happens next. To go down to, let's say, 80 proof or even 90 proof, you got 100 points of water coming into that liquid. So there's a lot of water in a typical gin, into a standard gin. With us, there's very little water. Okay, so that's what's in the bottle or in your glass. Where it really was a discovery was in the barrel. Because now we essentially just have a botanical brandy in the barrel. And it's aging in a way that at a typical brown spiritual age in that way, but it's got the botanicals in it. And so it's bringing up all of this like beautiful fruit and how you would, but the botanicals they don't spike, they just broaden out, they're blossoming in that barrel. And that was accidental. We were just interested in barrel finishing gins, and we discovered that you would get all of that intensity with this beautiful, soft finish. I find our barrel-aged gins to be ridiculous. I mean, I've tasted them, and they're 132 and 133, and I'm going, this is drinking softer than my brandy.
Yeah.
And so, for you, Morgan, with your bartenders, you put that behind, they won't know what they're working with.
Yeah. I will say that I'm super worn out on the gin category just because, Jesus Christ, like another botanical,
same
local,
thing. Yeah.
blah, 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 blah. And the first time I went to Copper and Kings and just went through the tour, did the tasting upstairs, and we get to the gin, it absolutely floored me just because I went in thinking it was going to be something, and it was so not that. It was exceptional, but it was just so different and gripping.
Gripping's a good word. It was intense, and it was unlike someone who's always hated gin, right? And I just haven't enjoyed it.
Have you ever had a gin and tonic in the shower?
No, it's an invitation.
Not even a naked gin and tonic.
No,
Come on, dude. Not even in the forest running.
You need to truly consider the gin and tonic in the shower.
Pasha Rosewater has been the igniter for my interest in gin. I've said this 1,000 times. They're the 8-row Flint of Clear Lake. They've got such a. You and Pasha are such kindred spirits as far as like.
I love that guy.
I love it all. So unfortunately, we are out of time.
No.
Yes, I could talk to you for 3 hours. And next time you're in town, let's do a super long one. Thank you so much for coming. This was a tremendous conversation. We didn't even get to your brandy.
No, that's fine.
I tasted it. It was awesome, and it's got a really.
It's super yummy.
It's got a perfumey nose to it what's the word I'm looking for? Aromatic's the word, but it's not doing it justice. On the palate, as I'm breathing and kind of chewing on it, there's this perfumey essence that
It's got really muscat in it.
Well, there it is.
The orange muscat. That's your secret weapon.
We have to go. Guys, thank you so much for coming. I'm sorry we couldn't get to everything.
Awesome.
But that was awesome. So, cheers.
Thanks, guys.
I'm going to give you a little cheers. There we go.
Yep.
Boom.
Cheers.
Love you.